Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. It's 6:39. Hopefully Elaine will be popping in. I know sometimes because of her work, if something comes up, she can be delayed. There are no citizens here for citizen comments. So we will go right into our interview with Aisha Robinson. Aisha, again, thank you so much for being willing to meet with us today. I hope that everything with your child from last week is on the mends. That is, just like you said, right? Like life happens, we just got to figure out what to do with it sometimes. So I don't know if you wanted to ask, if you had any questions about the Park District or the committee before we ask you our questions. I know you've had some conversations with Natalie, but I didn't know if there was any, anything that you wanted to know before we, start asking you about yourself.
Oh, sure. I would love to hear people's viewpoints on the committee, and what they feel the committee needs, and some of the strengths and challenges so far. That can happen now, or it can happen after you ask me questions. So either way.
Well, let me ask. I have a few general questions. Maybe I'll start with those. I know some of the other committee members will have some questions for you also, but I think that we can kind of fit that in a nice little rhythm with the questions that we have too. So I mean, I'm JC Herman. I am the chair of this committee. Our committee has been together for a couple years now, but we have been without leadership for the last year. So we've been kind of idle and stagnant, and we've been doing our best to tread water in the meantime, so that the committee didn't really fall apart, and we're really looking to get up and moving again. So one of our questions is what your experience with the Ridgeville Park District has been. If you've had any experience, if you've ever attended classes, if you use the parks, anything along those lines.
I have not had any experience with Ridgeville Park District. I've had experience with other park districts, but not this one in particular. The only knowledge that I have of Ridgeville is through Laura, who's taught there. So I'm familiar with her viewpoint of the park district. And I think similar to, I used to work with Chicago public schools, and I think one of the ways that I go about sort of familiarizing myself is sort of to kind of like just do a cultural assessment of the place. So in order to work with the park district, I would want to do that same sort of thing, which includes getting a sense of the types of programs that's offered, looking at things as far as accessibility, thinking about physical ability levels, how people feel and are welcomed. So what signage looks like, what language is used, how people are drawn into the community through the park district. So those are some of the things that I would be curious about if I was to start working with the park district.
Excellent. So just so you know, I'm assuming, Natalie had at least parts of these conversations with you, but I just want to make sure that you're aware of, some things. So Ridgeville Park District only serves, is only within district for a certain chunk of Evanston. It's like southern part of Evanston, so it's not all of Evanston, although programming is clearly available to everybody. To be considered within district, we do have boundaries. So everybody on the board and everybody on the committee needs to be within the Ridgeville boundaries. So it kind of limits who we can have participate in those two bodies. Laura's been working with the Park District for a long time, and she's got a good inside perspective. So I would imagine that she shared some good stuff with you. And we do have multiple buildings, so keep that in mind when you come to peek around. And we have several of our parks don't have any buildings at all. So that's something else to keep in mind, right? That's one of the issues that we come in terms of providing programming, is some of the parks don't have any facilities, right? There's no building, there's no bathroom, so it limits what we can host in those places. The city of Evanston will sometimes borrow the Ridgeville parks, but then they provide porta potties and that sort of thing at their cost. And so that's, that's a little bit different. So in terms of your experience with park districts and what you see currently happening and what you think would be possible, what would an equitable park district look like to you?
Some of those things that I just laid out. So to me, when I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and I had never encountered park districts before. I never knew what that was a thing until I moved here to Chicago. And actually, when I came here, I landed in Chicago Heights. And that was my first experience. I was a student and I knew I wanted to find out like what's happening in the community, where can I go, how can I be active, and I found the park district. And that experience of interacting with the park district was such a rewarding one that then when I've since had other siblings move to Chicago or other people that were curious about how do I learn about my neighborhood or how do I get connected with my neighborhood or how do I become active or experience sort of cultural experiences in my neighborhood. And so I've always talked to them about their park districts. Like, do you know what's going on in your park district? So to me, the things that are most important when we think about equitable is access is one. People knowing and understanding what's available to them. Also, it has to be an environment that's welcoming. And that means, people need to know when they're able to interact with the equipment, with the people that are there, with all of those things, so that they have an idea, but also the people that they interact with also have to have the capacity to be able to interact with lots of different people. Signage is important for people to know, see things that are familiar to them or that connect to them. So thinking about cross-cultural posters and offerings, and so those are things that are important in order to create an equitable space, and as well as accessibility. I became a mom very recently, about 2 years ago. My child actually has a limb difference. And what that has opened up for me, I've worked in this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion for a while, but becoming a parent of a child with a limb difference has opened up my thinking about another level and layer as far as accessibility on that level. So that's also something that, one, is important to me as a parent and a caregiver, but now my lens is broadened even more. So that's also important. And when we're thinking about equity and equality in these spaces.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's the way that life experiences change our lens in this work is really amazing. I've had, some similar experiences where things that I hadn't really considered before then come to the forefront, with those relationships and such, especially, such an important, parent-child relationship. And, to be honest with you, that is one of the challenges that we have, because the building is, Natalie's not here. I don't know, Matt Rogers, if you know, the building I think is about 100 years old. It's an old building.
It's an old house that has been refurbished in piecemeal sort of ways. There's no access to the second floor except by stairwell. The main programming space is on the first floor, but some of the programming space is on the second floor, and that creates challenges. But I mean, being a small park district, the thought of putting a $200,000 elevator in, that's 1/8 of our 1/4 of our budget almost, I guess. So, those sorts of things present challenges to us. which is why we've expanded out. We have a garage. It's called a garage, but it just has a large garage door that is open up and as a large space that can be used as well on the ground. That's at grade outside. But yeah, we do have certain challenges that are just hard to overcome.
Yeah, I think that what's one of the most important things is being open to identifying what the challenges are and being open and honest about what they are and trying to figure out ways to work around them, so that, again, going back to thinking about creating inclusive environments, how do we work within what we have in order to create an environment that's inclusive and welcoming to everyone across cultures, across ability levels, language, all of those things. There's always going to be those limitations, but as long as we're thinking about what can we do within the structure of what we have, and being open and honest and transparent about that, I think that's what people see and continues to draw them in and build that sense of community and connection. So that's great to hear that you all are thinking on that level.
Well, and trying to be creative too, right? The front door of the building, there's steps to go up there. So there is another door to the building that is at grade, but you have to go around the building in the corner. You have to ring a separate doorbell, which Natalie now put a camera at so they can see, if someone's standing there waiting. But a double stroller does not fit through that door. So as a twin parent, I've had other twin parents say, like, couldn't attend programming because I couldn't get my stroller in the door. Right. So these are things, challenges that we have that we would, love some creative solutions to. I'm going to pause real fast. I see that Elaine has joined us. Hi, Elaine.
Hi, Elaine.
Elaine, this is Aisha. This is Elaine. She's another one of our committee members.
Hi, Aisha. I apologize for being late. I was downtown and I just got in and I've stoked up the computer. I'm sorry I missed the earlier part of our discussion.
No worries. We'll catch you up, and you can always, we'll have our executive session. We can catch you up, and then there'll be the recording later too, if you want that, Elaine. We're only a couple questions in.
Okay.
I don't know how familiar you are with our equity journey at Ridgeville in these last several years. From what you do know, I was just kind of curious what your impression of, what's been happening. I'm not sure what conversations you had with Natalie on this front. I don't know if you want a quick recap of, why the committee started and how we got to where we are, any of the more recent events that have happened. But I was just curious of, of what you do know, what your impression of what we've been doing so far.
I know from what was shared with me from the previous work with creating the committee, but it would be great to hear from you all's perspective about where you are and the why of why you started. I know some things about Evanston, but Ridgeville specifically, it would be great to hear from you all.
So I'm just going to share with you my perspective real fast. I came across the Park District because I was looking for a dance class for my kids. And it was the most affordable dance class around the North Shore that I could find. And then once I saw Laura's credentials, it was a no-brainer. And then once I showed up to classes, and I was really surprised to see the lack of diversity in the classes. And so I went to Natalie, and Natalie and I started working together and tried to come up with some solutions to help draw more people into the Park District. So I started, offering classes. One of the things we started doing was I do a half-day workshop. The Evanston schools close once a month, halfway through the school day, so that the teachers can get professional development. And I also tried running classes directly out of the closest elementary school, out of Oakton. And we really weren't seeing the change that we wanted to see. And along that process, there was an election for the board. And there was a lot of past and current history that got unearthed, I don't know what word I'm looking for. And there was a lot of complaints from the community about Ridgeville, the programming, who's attending programming, comments made by board members, comments not made by board members. And that's when that was the catalyst for the start of the committee, right? Like that, essentially from my point of view, that put Natalie and I in a position where like, clearly this is something that needs to be addressed. Some of the information that was being put out into the public was not accurate information. And we weren't sure how to go about getting accurate information out while also making sure that we were attending to the issues that we saw, which from my point of view, the bulk of it was the lack of diversity in programming. So, there was a round of, interviews and such. Dr. Pat Effiam was chosen as the initial consultant. I'm pretty sure Natalie kind of talked to you a bit about the work that she did. Unfortunately, Pat passed about a year ago. And at that point, we were kind of left in limbo. Because of Pat's illness, there was a lot of work that we did not get to finish with her. We passed a charter, we passed an equity lens, or the board did, we suggested, right? Because we're not a decision-making body. The board passed the charter, they passed the equity lens, but we don't know how to use the equity lens. We were never trained. It's not something I feel comfortable. I mean, it's pretty straightforward and somewhat self-explanatory, but not something I feel comfortable executing on my own, definitely not the first time. Since Pat has not been working with us, we have tried really hard to, figure out what it is that we're supposed to do. How we can, communicate with the board better, how we can get another consultant in. I don't know if you're aware, but we did interview another consultant earlier this fall, and we are in a really uncomfortable and unfortunate situation due to that, which I don't want to go into too much in public meetings because I want to respect people's privacy. But we are now in a position where it would have been really great if we knew how to use that equity lens, because that's something that we need to put to use right now. And so that's from my point of view, that's kind of a short version of how we got to where we are now. I don't know if anyone else on the committee wants to add anything or give a different point of view.
Yeah, my perspective is a little bit different. I'm an employment discrimination attorney, and we handle some other kinds of discrimination claims, particularly in the field of education. And most of what I do is education related. Our family is diverse, and when our children were little, which is a long time ago, we found Ridgeville to be very, very welcoming and supportive. And frankly, one of the few institutions that, where we experience that kind of welcome and openness. So at the same time, I was working with the Girl Scout organization over at Oakton School, and we had a wonderful group of kids, and it was a very diverse group. And my particular chunk of kids, the one I was a co-leader in my group, mostly lived further southeast in that, the far southeast quadrant of the community. And now that it's, the time has passed, I was invited to participate on this committee after some members of the community came forward. Reverend Neighbors came over with a group of people that had concerns about the Park District, which is originally why I got involved. And what I'm seeing is, still a commitment to diversity. I think that the programming is somewhat less inclusive and equitable than it was at the time of my children. But I would love to see us take steps, not just take steps, but think about how we can make and act to make the Park District more inclusive of that group in the far southeast quadrant, which I think would be tremendously enriching for the Park District, and that the Park District has a great deal to offer that community. It certainly did when we were doing Girl Scouting over there. So that's kind of where I come from, and we sure miss Reverend Effiam.
I'll chime in here too, but just to note, Aisha, this is my second full meeting as a member of this committee. So I bring the perspective of still trying to figure out history, and still also, I've done a professor, and I've done anti-racist work in my discipline and in faith settings and higher ed, but also figuring out what this looks like in a park district. And I think one of the questions for me that's pressing is, what are our data points and how are we getting information so that we're really evaluating the fullness of our activities as a park district? And I think that's something I'm curious about, if you have, how you'd be able to help us to make sure that we're not just looking at limited data points, but we're looking expansively to consider all, the full gamut. And how we could really begin to, as JC and Lane have said, there's the stated desire, and how can we, live into that more fully? Yeah.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll go. I'm a bit of a weird, because I'm a hybrid here. First off, this is my first meeting. So Andrew has seasoned experience compared to me. But I also am one of the commissioners of the district. So I'm kind of a crossover position, and that's why I stepped in here when Martha left the board. And so it's kind of, I've witnessed one REDI committee meeting really. And so this is my first one on that. I'm very happy to hear, I think in Evanston, that we get so much into equity just simply means black or white. And I'm happy to hear you talking about other types of inclusiveness, because I think a lot of times that gets overlooked. I think the racial equity is the one everybody can see, and it's the most forward one, I would say. But it's nice to hear discussion about, people with different abilities. I come from the fact that, I am an inclusive because I'm a gay man. And so I can pass in society, if I want to. And so it's a little bit different for me, but to hear discussion about it not just being, well, how do we get the Black community involved? It's how do we get everybody involved? So I'm very happy to hear that discussion taking place in what you're saying. Because I think that's part of what we need to look at is the whole gamut of things, and getting as many people in as we can and making them feel welcome in a way that they can participate with our programming, with the events that we have, things like that.
Thank you for bringing that up, Matt. I'm not sure, and I can't remember if we've had this conversation recently. So the whole reason that this committee is a racial equity, diversity, and inclusion committee is because of the intersectionality, right? So in any realm of diversity, once you add race into that, it impacts everything else. And that was something that Dr. Effiam really talked to us about, that once you are addressing the racial piece, you can include everybody else in there. It's not that just because we're the racial equity committee, it does not mean we're only focusing on race. It's that intersectionality is really important, right? A child with a limb difference who is Black is going to be viewed very differently from a child with a limb difference who is white. So once you layer those pieces on there, that's how we got to where we are. And the added piece was the information that we got from the community. It really wasn't people with lack of mobility coming complaining. It really wasn't people of different religions coming and complaining. It was Black Evanstonians who were coming complaining, and that was something that we really felt we needed to address, since that's who came to us. So I do want to make that clear. And I don't know that we've spoken about this in a while, that it's our committee is not just focused on the racial piece. It's just that racial piece.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we are. I'm not saying we are. So I didn't mean to interpret.
No,
I'm just saying in Evanston, you see that happen a lot in lots of institutions, because that's something that is easily discernible, and there's a sizable population. People who are differently abled don't comprise the same type of population and don't have the same voice in the community as some other groups do.
Absolutely. And that brings me to my next question in terms of, doing equity work in Evanston is different from doing equity work in other places, right? It's one thing to come and try to explain to people what equity and equality and diversity actually is. It's a whole other thing coming to a group of people who already have their ideas about what that means and helping build on that. So I was just curious, I know you said you're familiar with some of the equity work being done in Evanston. I was just curious if there's anything else that you wanted to share in terms of the unique challenges that we're faced with doing this work in Evanston.
I think one of the things about Evanston is that when people think of people out on the outside, when they think of Evanston, typically they think of Northwestern. And my sister used to work it. So my relationship with Evanston in that area is, I will say, peripheral. I have relationships with people who, my brother teaches in Evanston and he lives in Evanston, and my sister used to work in Evanston. And then, so my experience with it is from being connected to people who live or work in that community, and hearing their experience. Obviously, my siblings are Black people. And so hearing their experience of the community and what the needs are that are specific, there are some things, every community, there are things that are unique to that community. And then when you hear about some experiences and things that people are encountering, either as being the only Black male teacher in a school, or being
with a whole bunch of Black students.
Right. And there are some experiences like those that are not unique to Evanston. And so that's where knowing about other communities and how other communities have managed around similar issues can be useful to look to see what can we apply, what can we learn from, and what can we use in this situation when we hear similar things happening or hear about similar issues sort of showing up. But obviously because my experience has been one where my experience, it has been shaped by those who live in that community and I don't live in the community. I want to spend more time becoming more familiar and showing up in places to gather experiences and information from my own and a different sort of vantage point and viewpoint. It's also useful and helpful to hear from this committee about what you're hearing, and the demographics information is also very, very important, which Andrew brought up. And that was one of the questions I had written down is about staff demographics and demographics of people who take advantage of programming, and gathering more information about what's offered, what it looks like. So those things help to sort of carve out what makes this unique, is hearing about who is accessing, who desires to access, where are the limits and why do those limits and barriers exist, what's been tried, and then using information that we know from other communities that have similar situations and have worked through them or have tried different things that didn't work, and seeing what can be done to cause shifts and adjustments in the community and within the park district.
The one thing that I'll say about Evanston also is that Evanston really is two different cities in one city. I live in the far south southeast corner that you were talking about, I think, Elaine. I'm 250 feet, 400 feet from Chicago. And my neighborhood and the 8th Ward is very much like an extension of Chicago. And so our park district kind of is also that dividing line of the two Evanstons, where north of that, you become much more what you think of as a traditional suburb with lots of single family homes, with not as much density. Whereas in the south end, we tend to have more density. Even the single family homes are kind of right up on top of each other. So it really is, when we talk about Evanston, it's really two different segments of Evanston. And the experiences that people have are different in those two different areas of Evanston. I mean, our area down here, we're very diverse. You get into some of the neighborhoods up north and they aren't as diverse. So I think that also helps with the viewpoints of how people interact, because in our neighborhood, my building, I live in a 25 unit building, and we have a very diverse group even within our building, of people of color, people of different sexual orientations, people who were born in the United States, who were born outside of the United States, et cetera, different age groups, everything. So we're kind of even a microcosm within our building. And I think that's one of the challenges in looking at Evanston as opposed to looking at lots of other places, is we are a suburb, but our part of Evanston really is the city, extended north.
Just a small correction. We are technically a city and not a suburb. I've been called out for that on multiple occasions.
Well, we are a city, but we're a suburb as well. So we're not a village, but we are still a suburb, because the city definition is different from a suburb definition. So.
I also just want to second that, Aisha, when you mentioned, a lot of people think of Northwestern when they think of Evanston. A lot of us who live in South Evanston, I don't usually frequent North Evanston. I mean, I know some people who live up there, but I can go months without knowing that Northwestern exists. Like, it's not at all a part of my life. I've had so many Evanstonians be like, how could that be possible? Like, come to South Evanston. We don't have any college kids here. There's no tailgating, right? There's a lot of that stuff that is connected to Northwestern does not come all the way down here. And so I think that's a really important point. And I also think that, the borders of Ridgeville really reflect that, right? Like, the borders of Ridgeville are South Evanston. It's actually why Ridgeville was created, was because I forget exactly, what year it was, but the people in South Evanston, the city of Evanston was not providing programming for South Evanston. Even from the point of view, I've been living in South Evanston for 20 years. Our streets used to not get plowed. Street cleaning would not come through, right? Like, we were not getting the same services as North Evanston was. And that has changed over the last 20 years. But I think that's one of the purposes of Ridgeville, is to fill that gap that the city does not provide for South Evanston in terms of programming and accessibility. Yes, Andrew. You're still muted.
I know this is an interview, but we're talking about Evanston. So just I guess we can. I'll make it a question. I'll find a way. But I think one of the things, the challenges we have to deal with as a park district is, and it's very dated data. It's limited, but from the 2010 census, to look at the racial dot map and get a sense of that even our park district is not. It's a divided, right? There's segregation that occurs within our park district. And Elaine already mentioned the southeast corner, right? So there's the southeast corner as well, just in general, the 8th Ward, and then we have the 9th Ward. And just looking at the demographics for those two wards will instantly reveal some differences and disparities. And then to overlay that with the racial dot map, and it's dated again, but it's so powerful because right in it are all of our parks in green. And that infrastructure wise, we are skewed towards the less diverse sections of Ridgeville Park District, So I'm curious, what that raises for you is how do we deal with even that kind of infrastructure imbalance in dealing with, Elaine mentioned programming, and how do we work within that? We can't buy new parks, I assume. Matt already named the limits on the budget. So how do we work with that? I don't know what that raises for you. About how we can be equitable when even kind of the infrastructure itself is not situated equitably.
I think doing part of it is doing that uncovering, and everyone has to, doing that uncovering, identifying what the issues are and where they lay, and then trying to figure out how to design, create programming as well as outreach that invites community in. There's I don't know if everyone's familiar with Theaster Gates and what he's done on the South Side, which is based. So the idea is that communal spaces is how you create sort of, and public spaces is how you create a sense of community, and to have people see that the society values where they live. And so that is basically to me, the heart, like that is what the heart of park districts is a demonstration of how we value our community. And so you do that through creating opportunities for people to feel like there actually is a community. And so uncovering some of this data you're talking about, which was some of the questions I started as we were, as I was listening, writing down, like demographics of staff, all of those things. We need to look at that and figure out what the story actually is, so that we can figure out how or what parts of it we want to rewrite, and figure out how to do it. So there's some data digging that needs to happen, as well as sort of looking through what's also offered, and how is it offered. How is it communicated? What's the language that's used? Is it actually language that is accessible to all? Is it, so, and then starting to not tear apart, but sort of like dig into what's actually offered to make sure that it's actually accessible to everyone.
Aisha, did Natalie mention to you that she is working with Tracy Olasimbo? I don't know if you're familiar with her. So that was one of the things that came out of our last round of interviewing. Tracy Olasimbo is a Evanston native, went to high school here, has been doing equity work here. She is connected with the YWCA. And so she is working with Natalie, not the committee, but she's working with Natalie on that outreach piece. And so I can go back and I don't know, Matt, if you remember which month it was, but Tracy presented to the board and she had some of this information, right? Like she pulled.
Yeah, it was I think 2 months ago. So what would that have been? Like April?
April. That's what I was thinking. February or March or April. I'll figure out for sure. I can send you a link, and I'll send it out to the committee too, because I'm realizing now, no, none of you go to the board meeting, so you didn't get to see Tracy's presentation. But it's it's recorded, so we can go back and watch it. That's something that she looked at. So she essentially made all these graphs and such to show us, like, here are the people who are coming from neighborhoods, here is like the racial breakout of who's coming. And her and Natalie are working on that outreach piece. One of the really exciting things is Ridgeville is going to have its first block party, and they're having it at one of the parks where there's not usually a lot of programming, over by Reba Park. And that's something that directly came out of the work that Natalie and Tracy have done together. So that's something to keep in mind too, is that, we are asking for a lot of work, but we do have someone that's helping us with the outreach, and, we can flow information back and forth between who the committee hires, and who, and Tracy, working with Natalie, so that we're working as a cohesive group, even though we're not all technically working together.
The one thing I will say about the information that Tracy presented was, unfortunately, a lot of that was COVID, like COVID hit halfway through 1 year. So the demographics are slightly unreliable, I would say, because it's not a full programming season with active participation from everybody. I mean, there were classes that we had to kill because of COVID. And,
Camps were
obviously something that
small.
was held outside had a better chance of surviving than something that was inside in a small room based on that. So the numbers are good, but they also are not really a full, complete picture. And that's just because of the years that they had done it.
I'd say that my perspective on what we're looking at in terms of this of the outreach situation is that it's in some respects I've characterized it as low hanging fruit. Matt, my scouting experience was with the neighborhood that you're describing, and the girls in my cohort, we had a much larger troop than that. But my group was the girls were they were Black, they were Hispanic, there were a few white girls, and they were gender fluid. Speaking of them as a group, and the girls, their families were very actively involved. Really, it was a wonderful experience. And I see the issue that we have is really is one of facilities and accessibility, because the Park District House is it's a distance from there. It's a schlep. And where this group was attended Oakton, but our meetings were at Oakton. It's another couple of blocks to get up here, and it involves people driving the kids around. And in terms of regular participation, we'd need to think about either transportation and or expanding our facilities. And I think that we've got property down in that area, and my sense of it is that I'd like to see us thinking big and trying to figure out how we can get some facilities created down there, and really directly involve the community. And I think it would thrive. I think it's really a ripe opportunity, and I find it very exciting that we're working to build that.
How has technology been used? I think one of the things that COVID also, I asked this because I was working with a group of girls in Florida, and they were logging on to do a group on, it was just wellness and fitness, and I'm a dance movement therapist, so that's that other side. It was wellness and movement, and particularly for this group of girls in Tampa who Black and Hispanic girls, they were logging on regularly. I'm underlying all of this is trust and relationship. So those things are key to everything and anything that you want to do. But I'm curious about when we're talking about accessibility and reach, one of the things that COVID helped to show was that there's a way that you can use technology to at least bridge in the meantime. How has technology been used as a way to sort of build and connect and get programming access for people who wouldn't typically be able to get it by coming in this accessibility issue? Or has that not been sort of?
No, it has. Natalie's actually done a really good job, because part of it too is, clearly, a big chunk of our responsibility is serving the community's needs. But then because of COVID, we also had to take into consideration what the teachers felt comfortable with. So I personally, I think that Natalie did a really great job. She gave teachers the option of what they felt comfortable with. If they wanted to do a Zoom only, a Zoom and in person outside. One of the things that I did was through District 65, they were offering after school enrichments online. And so the Park District offered free programming for kids that they could log on and do some of the programming that I offer, which can be a little challenging sometimes, right? When you offer something for free, when the classes were filled and then half of the people didn't show up. So those spots were taken, but then, they weren't actually using the programming. So I think I think we did see, and again, Natalie would be, much better to answer this question because this is, her area. But I think we did see a good use of that. Now, whether or not that brought in new or different people, I don't know. I really think it was like the hardcore Ridgeville people is my impression of like who stuck to classes, whether they were online or in person. But Natalie really would have to answer that for you. That's not I don't have access to that information. We did make an attempt, and running those after school Zoom classes were a whole lot of fun, because then the kids who showed up like really wanted to be there. So that was great. But all the work that I do for the park district, I mean, on the committee, I'm a volunteer, but the paid work that I do at the park district, I only work with kids there. So I also have a limited scope. I don't really know all that much about what happens with the adult classes. So again, Natalie, who's working really hard right now to help take care of her parents, would be able to, answer those questions, I think, more specifically for you. I do, and I really did not mean for this to go on. I'm having a lot of I'm enjoying having this conversation with you. I don't want to keep us for all that much longer. I'm assuming other committee members have questions too. I do two things that I want to make sure I bring up is I do want to mention this. Reading through your CV and reading through the proposal that you put together, something that has really come up a lot for myself, and I know for Natalie too, is this idea of wellness and taking care of ourselves so that we can continue doing this work. So I don't want to talk too much about that now. If we do get a chance to work together, I would love to, see how you pull all that together. But I did just want to mention that I think that is a really important piece of this work. That was something that the consultant that we had interviewed in the fall, Dr. Logan, had brought up in his interview, that one of the things that he wanted us to consider was the idea of motivation. And I think to me, motivation and wellness go hand in hand. And I think that, this work is not sustainable for anybody if we don't have those two pieces in place. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate that point of view, because I think that's a really important piece of getting this done. If we burn ourselves out, we don't help anybody. But the other thing that I want to make sure I ask you about is in the request for proposals, there's the attachment A, which is the scope of services. I'm curious, what's your take on, what it is that we feel that we need, that we have listed in there. We had a much longer list at the beginning of this process, but since we've been at this for a few months now, I think we've been able to whittle it down pretty well. I was really impressed with the RFP that Natalie put together. So I just want to kind of hear, your views, your ideas on, the scope of services that we are hoping for.
I think that it sounds like it's a beginning point. I think that anyone who does this work knows that once you get into it, similar to this conversation, we've brought up several things that need to be addressed that weren't necessarily pulled out in that scope of work, but are crucial components of, if we want to move forward, we've got to look at this, or we got to do this thing. So I think that the scope of work is a good and solid place to start. I think there also has to be a level of openness to understanding that the work, the directions there might need to be some adjustments in places in order to be responsive to what we're uncovering as we move along in the process, and that there just has to be flexibility on both ends, on my end and the committee's end, to understand that if we have to shift, let's create the structure to shift and then move in the new direction that we need to move, that's responsive to the work that we're doing. I'll give an example. I'm doing some work with an organization where it's the setup of their committee. They have a core committee, and then they have subcommittees that are doing the work for their organization, moving the organization forward. And we just realized that those subcommittees needed to change, because of what's happening now at the organization is bringing up other things that need to be addressed by that manpower. And so those subcommittees wrapped up the work that they were doing and then shifted their focus to move in the direction that the organization now was moving in. And so we created the structure in order for them to do that shift and change and adjustment, and it made sense. And I think that's part of the process too, is talking about if we need to, I have a cold, so I've been, excuse me. So making sure that everyone is clear about why we need to make those adjustments, creating the structures and putting them in place to make the adjustments, and then moving in that new direction. To the wellness piece, I do think it's crucial, and we don't have to go into it now. But so dance therapy, the underlying belief is that the body, the mind, and the spirit are all interconnected. And so in order to treat someone, you have to look at all of those parts. And so I approach this work in the same sort of way, that we are whole humans. And so in order to move this work forward, we have to be addressing all of our different parts. One of the things that I did ask Natalie about was if there was space created for the processing of the loss that you all experience, because I also think that that's an important part of this process and something that needs to happen if it hasn't, to create space for that and honor what was, so that you can have that foundation and move towards where you're going next. So the wellness thing it's very important to me.
That's a really good point. I know I've had conversations, with lots of people, on the board and the committee, about having lost Dr. Effiam, but I don't think we really process it as a committee. I mean, we kind of went on hiatus for a while, and then once we got back together, it was, try to go and get some more stuff done. That's not something I had even really paid attention to be honest with you. And that, it was a big loss. Not just for us, for a lot of people, but in terms of our committee. Does anybody else have questions? I think I got through all like the main general questions that we had, but if anyone else has any other specific ones, please feel free.
I'll just jump in here real quick. The one thing that I would like to see us not do is sort of start over. That's one of my big things, is I don't want us to step back. So I would hope that whoever we work with, whether it's you, Aisha, or someone else, that there's an assessment taken of the work that Dr. Effiam had done and what we can build on that, as opposed to just sort of starting fresh with everything. Because we've already sort of lost a couple years here, and to start over means we've lost those years for good, as opposed to what little did come out of those. At least we can build on that. So that's something that I would hope that you have time at some point to look through Dr. Effiam's assessment if you haven't already. And so if you come to the board, I know that will be something that's important to many of my fellow board members, is that we don't lose momentum and sort of start fresh. So that's one of those things. And then just kind of in looking through the project deliverables that you've identified, I think everything there is good, and being available to at some level also help the board, and work with the board directly outside of this committee, because we're the ones who make the policies and adopt the policies. And so anything that I would hope that any REDI equity coordinator would be involved in helping the board understand why policies are put forth, what we benefit from these policies, the detriments of not adopting these policies, things like that. So I would hope that would be something that would fall under this position. And I think I see a lot of that in the deliverables that you're outlining, but I'm just kind of wanting to emphasize that again, as a point of something that's of interest to me.
I think that that Dr. Effiam accomplished a great deal, and I like the idea. I think that it's a wise recommendation that we take some time to, formally to recognize and mourn her loss, and consider what it is that we learned, what we were able to accomplish during that time period. And Matt, that perhaps addresses some of your concerns, that we not go backwards, but that we take the lessons that we learned from her and move forwards.
Absolutely. I agree. Pat started us off on a really, really great foot. And we've been standing on it ever since. I mean, that's how strong she built it for us, that even in her absence, we've been able to keep together. And since her passing, we've only lost one committee member, which I think is really impressive. Everybody else has still participated. And then we even gained two, right? Because we lost the board lost a commissioner. And so, I really want to echo that we really give her work the power and the space that it deserves to have, because she did do, a lot of really great stuff for us. Andrew, do you have any other questions?
I think we meandered our way through all of mine. I was interested about the dance movement and how that could impact your perspective, and you've already talked about that. So I'm good. Yeah.
Awesome. Matt or Elaine, do you have any other questions that haven't been addressed yet?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yes.
And especially Aisha.
Aisha, do you have any other questions for us?
My questions are more so related to the work specifically. So there are questions that have come up just in this conversation about things that I'm curious about, gather more information about. So no questions at this current time.
Fantastic. I'm available if there's any other, if you want to have another conversation, or once, Natalie's a little bit more available. I don't remember when she's coming back in town, but she's got all the information I have and then a whole ton more. But she also, she's not the chair of the committee. It's also not, within her job description to be, doing some of this too. So feel free, to reach out if these are questions that you would like to know before you, if you have the opportunity to meet with the board next week. If there's questions that you want before then, feel free to get in touch with me. I think you have my email. Natalie had me CC'd on a lot of the emails that you guys had gone back and forth. So feel free to get in touch so that if you do get a chance to meet the board next week, that you feel, really good and prepared for whatever might come your way. Well, I would like to thank you.
Are we meeting with Aisha next week?
I don't know.
I was gonna say, I don't think it's on our agenda. I've just got a tentative agenda, so it may change, but I don't think we are yet.
Right now, it's not on there. If I read the email correctly, Natalie pointed out that meeting with an equity consultant was not on there because it was going to be based on this meeting.
Right.
Because we'll still need to go into executive session, and then she'll make those adjustments for the agenda for next week if necessary.
Right. Okay.
I will admit, I read through that email pretty quickly, but I believe.
Well, and I have not looked at our agenda for next week. It's a week off. It's like, I
gotta
have
catch what you can and deflect everything else, right?
Exactly.
Oh, boy. I mean, if COVID taught us nothing, it was that, I don't know about you, but it was that, like, my plate can only be so full. I'm trying to learn that lesson in these days. Well, Aisha, thank you so much for your time. I really hadn't intended on keeping you for this long, but I just felt like you had so much good information to share with us. I appreciate you, responding to the RFP and being willing to, take our situation into consideration. And either Natalie and I will be in touch with you. Today's Thursday, right? Probably tomorrow, I would imagine. I'll touch base with Natalie and we'll get in touch with you.
Okay, thank you. It was great to meet all of you tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you too.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a good night, everybody.
Too.
Too.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see where I lost my agenda here. I think the only other thing, we've got the approval of the minutes from May 19th. We can still approve those because, I mean, Matt wasn't here. But there's 3 of us to vote still, right? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes from May 19th, 2022?
So moved.
Second?
Seconded. Elaine.
Awesome. Julie, could you roll call vote us on that?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. JC Herman,
Yes.
Andrew Weimer,
Yes.
Elaine Siegel.
Yes.
And then you
Roll call.
still ask Matt and then Matt will abstain,
Matt Rogers.
or I
I
assume.
abstained since I was not yet a member of the committee.
Awesome. Under old business, Natalie has updating on equity consultants. It is my understanding that there were no other applicants for the RFP. So I think there is not any, we probably have more information than she does right now. So then that puts us at, there's no new business, our executive session to discuss the equity consultant proposals. If somebody would like to make a motion to move us into executive session.
I would say that we do not need executive session because this is not really an executive session discussion. As a committee that is recommending only, all final decisions rest in the board. So this isn't really an executive session. And since nobody else is here, I don't think it really matters, but I would not go into executive session.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you about that. I think that it is a personnel matter, and that we
But
should-
you're not the final determining body on it. So the personnel, and this isn't a personnel matter, it's a hiring of a consultant. And we've had the discussion at the board level about this. And if this were on the board, I would vote not to go into executive session as well.
So I think,
Well,
and
I respectfully disagree, Matt. I think it is a personnel matter, and and we have had a discussion with an applicant for a position, and we're making a recommendation to the board, and that's a personnel matter, and it comes within the ambit of the Open Meetings Act.
I respectfully disagree, and I will not go into executive session. So if you want to go into executive session to discuss, I will not be able to join.
so Matt, just so you know, the information that I received from the Park District's lawyer was that we needed to go into executive session.
And just so you know, Charles and I disagree a lot on the Open Meetings Act. I've been through multiple trainings on it, and this is not a personnel matter because this is not an employee. This is a consultant. This is the same as, and I hate to be this crass, and I don't mean it to sound this crass, but this is the same as purchasing a printer or a copier or anything along those lines. It's not a personnel decision. If Charles were here, he and I would be having that discussion.
Okay, I personally, I absolutely will not go against the Park District's lawyer.
That's fine. I will not be joining you in executive session because I believe it's inappropriate.
Okay.
But since my vote comes later anyway, I don't know that it really matters a whole lot.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, that being said, would somebody like to make a motion for us to go into executive session?
Sure, I'll move that we go into executive session.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Well, Matt, thank you for your time. I understand where you're coming from. And we'll see you next week.
All right, I'll see you all. I won't see you all. I'll see you next week, and we'll hopefully move forward on this. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Bye.
Do you need
Okay.
a roll call for executive session?
Oh, yeah, because we still need to vote.
Okay. JC Herman,
Yes.
Elaine Siegel,
Yes,
Andrew Weimer.
Yes. And should we have recalled that before Matt left? Because he would be a no, right?
Yeah, he would have been a no. I
he
don't
already
know.
said he was leaving.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. We're out of executive session. It's currently 8:04. And we are on the 4 action item, voting on the equity consultant recommendation. Is there anybody who would like to make a motion?
I'm willing to make a motion. I have to look, I'm looking for language if we have it in the agenda.
So the motion would be something along the lines of recommending to the board that they hire Aisha Robinson as an equity consultant for the REDI committee.
Yes, that, I make that motion.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
All right, I'll roll call vote us. Andrew Weimer,
Yes.
Elaine Siegel,
Yes.
JC Herman, yes. I will take this to the board next week, and then I will send you all an email through Julie to let you know how it goes. Just as a reminder, it will be recorded, so if you can't attend the session, you can always go back and watch it. Okay, that brings us to call of the committee. Does anybody have anything they want to say?
No.
No.
Can the information from Tracy's presentation be provided to our committee? Is it
Yes.
only presentation format, or can we make sure that we have those documents if they exist?
Let me double check with Natalie about the physical documents.
Okay.
The presentation, I will figure out which precise meeting it was at, and I will send out the link to the REDI committee so you all can see that. That's one of the things that I do really like about the way that Tracy works. She has this really good combination, I think, between data and real life. I don't know, I really enjoyed watching what she was able to do with those numbers and getting a better understanding of who we're serving. I thought it was important. So I'll make sure that you all get that information.
Thank you.
I just want to say happy summer. School's out and 4 more school days. I'm looking forward to summer. I hope you all are too. I'm very interested in seeing what the beaches are going to look like this summer with the free beach tokens for most Evanston residents, because it's not all. And with the new parking. I don't know if you all know about the new parking for non-Evanston residents around the beach, $3 an hour. I'm curious to see, how this is going to impact equity within and without Evanston. I think that'll be an interesting thing to see. Alrighty, on that note, does somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I will roll call us out. Andrew Weimer,
Yes.
Elaine Siegel,
Yes.
and JC Herman, yes. Thank you both so much. I will keep you all updated on anything I find out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night, everybody.